The one thing that you'll get from this channel is lots of discussions about why privatization is bad, especially for natural monopolies and utilities that we all have to use and should basically be provided, as far as I'm concerned, as a public good by the public purse, paid for by taxation and then subsidized through bills, rather than being used as a method with which foreign investment companies can then asset strip our national assets because they know they can count on a bailout from the government because we can't just have a government that lets the water industry fail. Now, we have the only fully privatized water delivery system in the world. There are plenty of countries in which actually privatizing the water is banned. Even Chile, even under Augusto Pinochet, they didn't fully privatize the water network. That's how batshit insane the right-wing privatization commitments with regards to our water industry were under Thatcher. One of the main things I talked about before, actually, I did a whole segment about this, talking about Thames Water and how they were in financial trouble because this Australian investment firm called Macquarie had essentially took on debts on behalf of Thames Water to pay their own shareholders out a bunch of money. Because again, they know that because this something is interwoven into the fabric of society, they know the government can't let this fail. So they were always going to be able to guarantee some kind of bailout eventually. And of course, back where we are back where we were always knew that we would be. Thames Water is about to collapse. It's about to go into administration. There has been some discussion about what the response to this should be. Right? I think they should just let it all die, let the company go bust, buy the infrastructure for peanuts, let the shareholders reap the dividends that they have so much sown up to this point, right? We should take these back into public ownership, wait for the actual infrastructure itself to be sold off by a collapsing Thames Water, and let the shareholders deal with the debt payments. The collapse has happened in the wake of an interest rate rise, whilst they've been kind of surfing on top of what debts they had accrued whilst taking more and more customers' money and using it to pay interest on the debt that they owe to cover the fact that these were all driven by the private equity firm that owned them to be able to pay out as shareholder dividends. The interest rate rise, the base rate rise from the Bank of England, has pushed these debts that they've taken up back when interest rates were low so that they can't pay these back, and this is why Thames Water is going to default, right? So not only have bill payers have been having to pay out all these debt interest payments to their creditors of Thames Water, they're now going to have to pay even more to be able to deal with any way in which they're going to have to save this company from the brink of collapse, which just shows you how privatization under neoliberalism works, right? You privatize the gains, you subsidize the losses. Simple as that.
Hello, I'm Sarah Bentley, Thames Water's CEO.
Not anymore.
We've stepped up our leakage activity to help us get back on track this year, but it is going to be a challenge.
It's turned out to be a bigger challenge than Bentley thought. Last night, the chief executive suddenly resigned, leaving the government looking at the prospect of an emergency rescue.
The ironic first time was I'm actually going to say I actually feel kind of sorry for the CEO. Just got appointed by shareholders into an impossible position for an unsalvageable company in an invidious position. It's just like, well, not much I can do about this, right? Already at the bottom of this gigantic hole that's been dug into by the private equity firm that bought this company in 2016, I believe it was. And so really and truly, there's nothing much that she could have done other than just go begging on bended knee to the government for a bailout.
But higher up the pecking order, there was more anxiety, though the details were a tad patchy and unclear.
Well, I'm very concerned. Obviously, this is a commercially sensitive situation, and I know that my colleagues across government are looking at what we can do. I don't know too much about what the plans are going to be. I was concerned to hear that the CEO had resigned abruptly.
Incredible watching an absolutely fucking gormless Kemi Badenoch just stare her own failed ideology in the face and just go, oh, well, this is bad, isn't it? Whoop, not my problem. Like the Competition Markets Authority apparently have a look at this stuff. What are they going to do? Just go, oopsie, right? Can't put the toothpaste back in the tube now, your problem. There's not much else they can really do now. The private equity firm has fucked off back to Australia. Right? They're hardly going to be able to hold it accountable for this, right? Really and truly, the only response to this is to go through the kind of hostile takeover that is necessary to ensure that this never happens again. Because we know that this will happen again. This is the business model of these private investment firms, to take something which they know the state can't lose on, and asset strip and leave the state to pick up the tab. This is basically what happened with mortgage-backed securities in the run-up to 2008, because they knew that they were betting big on something that the economy literally cannot survive without: housing, and also in this case, water. They know that they can guarantee that there is no chance of the government letting it fail, because it's so completely interwoven into the fabric of how society functions in the first place. So your response to this is go, look, if this happens again, we will nationalise you and we'll give you no compensation. It's as simple as that, right? Look after your shareholders, look after the public, or else we'll go on for the nuclear option. Unless you show at least one time, in quite frankly what is the most egregious case today, that you're happy to pull the nuclear option, why would they ever believe that you would, especially in an investment environment, in a neoliberal capitalistic environment, where basically no government ever does do this, right? So by going full hog and go, look, yeah, we're very welcome to do this, right? Shareholders be damned, let's bring this back into public control with no compensation. That gives far more investors into these particular dodgy industries a little pause for thought, and gives these private equity firms far less of the ability to be able to asset strip them in the future, right? You only have to do it once. You only have to do it once, and then you immediately stop anyone else from doing it again. But because they know that no government, under especially Conservative or Labour right administration, is going to do this, all these shareholders and private equity firms can just do this willy-nilly ad infinitum, because they know there's not going to be any pushback. As soon as someone moderately progressive or left-wing comes along, pulls that option to begin with, suddenly they'll get scared off from doing it again.
Is Labour MP Darren Jones, who chairs the Business and Trade Select Committee. Let's come to Thames Water. What should the government do?
Well, if Thames Water goes bust, the government's going to have to take it over, but that's an outrageous outcome, because Thames Water should never have been in this position in the first place had there been adequate regulation of their conduct.
Right, I mean...
Well, no, they shouldn't have been in this position in the first place, because you should never have been fucking privatised, Darren, right? It's looking at Labour opposition, not refusing to properly oppose any of this stuff, right? If this was in 2019, if this was in 2018, if Jeremy Corbyn was still leader of the Labour Party, they would have had John McDonnell sitting where Darren Jones is sitting now, saying, this should never have been privatised, we will take this back into public ownership, never again. Never again will this happen on our watch, right? The Conservative Party, whose ideology this is based upon, put the trust in the private sector, to deliver this, and they have failed to deliver at the expense of the public, not the expense of anything else, specifically the public. It's the shit in your rivers, right? It's the leaks in your roads. It's the increase in your bills.
Labour's policy used to be to nationalise water, then it's not anymore, because you said it's not a good use of taxpayers' money. If the business is bust, you may as well nationalise it.
Well, we'll have no choice but to bring a business back into public
ownership. With no intention of it going private again?
Well, it depends entirely on the nature of the business and whether it's a viable commercial concern. But you're right to highlight.
Why are you opening this up? We know that it's failed. It's obviously failed. Just say, well, we'll have to bring it into public ownership and we're never going to privatise it again? No, we'll not privatise the water companies ever again. It's clear the private sector can't be trusted with this. This both siding shit from... He's supposed to be one of the good Labour MPs as well.
That where companies are too important to fail and taxpayers are asked to underwrite them with a blank cheque, there should be much stronger regulation about the way in which senior executives...
Here's a strong regulation. Put the fucking government in control by them owning it, right? Not only will it be overall cheaper, because then we won't actually have to pay out in shareholder profits, right? All of the money will then go back into the public purse. It also will stop any amount of this private equity fumbling shit happening in the future. God, it's so obvious.
Executives and shareholders run those businesses, which has clearly not happened here.
But the government taking it over will cost a fortune for taxpayers, won't it? I mean, it's got massive liabilities.
Yeah, this is why it's sickening, because this has already happened in the energy market last year. It now seems to be happening in the water sector. Ministers have either been asleep at the wheel or they didn't care about the risk in these important sectors, and now taxpayers are bearing the brunt.
Is Thames Water...
I mean, that is also true. And it is indeed, they probably did know, and they also most certainly did not care, because, that's who they rule to benefit. Not you at home.
I would expect the government now to do a full risk assessment of the sector and other companies that are too important to fail, to be able to be honest with Parliament about what the risks are and therefore what their actions should be.
Nationalise a lot of them. If it's something that we cannot function without as a society, you just fucking nationalise it. I'm sorry. I hate to be an overzealous leftoid on this stuff, but just nationalise the fuck out of it. Like, it's not rocket science. You need water, you need trains, you need healthcare, you need houses. Fucking let the government do it.
So we looked at the energy market last year and the failings of the energy regulator that led to billions of pounds of exposure to taxpayers. And we highlighted a number of issues about the role of regulators in supervising the conduct of the people running these businesses that walk away with millions of pounds personally and have no consequences for their behaviour whatsoever. It seems to me that there are very similar issues now in the water sector.
Do you think this changes the argument?
I mean, it's almost like this idea that we can just regulate our way out of this was always going to fucking fail in the first place. It was never going to be successful. There was never going to be any kind of positive outcome from just expecting regulators, who a lot of the time make up people who used to be in industry. I'll let you at home decide whether or not you think they're going to be independent arbitrators in these circumstances. And that clearly has failed us to this point. We're just going to continue doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results.
There's been lots of conversations, Frank, I shall start with you on this, about the predicament that the water companies find themselves in. We're all familiar by now with the fact that actually many of them, they keep dumping excrements, it's tea time, I'll be polite, into the seas and all the rest of it, right? There's conversations now that they're hatching these plans to increase bills yet again for people to basically try and shore up some of their failings, if you ask me, but they would say it's to meet environmental targets. Many are saying, you know what, forget it all and nationalise water in this country. What do you make to it?
Well, I was always against privatising water. I think water is a source of life. It's very important for people. It's not something you want to sort of buy and sell on a market the way you would do with shoes or with cornflakes. And in particular, what really got me was that when the water companies were privatized, it began to be owned by companies from abroad. So if you look at Thames Water, it's owned by Chinese companies, by Canadian companies, people who are thousands and thousands of miles away from the people, have got to live with the consequences of their economic decisions. And I feel that the nation has been let down by the privatization of water.
Yeah, but if I follow your thought process, what you're saying primarily is we should keep water nationalised because it's a commodity that everybody needs and it's essential to life, basically. But where do you draw the line with that?
But also it's a natural monopoly, though, right? This is the key. I probably cut her off too early there, but I'm assuming she can make some other comparison between like food or housing or whatever it might be. Well, the issue is that this is a natural produce of the earth, which is of course monopolized in the way that it's delivered into our sector as well, right? You can't really have competing water pipelines going into your house. It is a natural monopoly both from source and as far as delivery is concerned. So markets can't compete. They have to be regulated to stop price gouging. But the regulator isn't powerful enough to be able to stop the kind of asset stripping things that we've seen with regards to Thames Water and what almost certainly will happen with Southern Water now as well.
Because we all need electricity, we all need food. You might say not cornflakes, but we all need food. So by your rationale, you're going to be nationalising pretty much everything.
Well, not necessarily.
Yes. Fucking full Soviet Union, baby. Let's go. Well, obviously, no, not asking to nationalise everything, but more council housing, because of course housing is a market that is inelastic in terms of demand and pretty inelastic in supply as well, especially given the kind of planning regulations that we have. Energy, of course, should be brought into public ownership too, given what we've seen over profiteering due throughout the entirety of the cost of living crisis by energy companies. Of course, we should nationalise this as well, and simple. What I've already talked about with regards to water nationalisation. The fact that she goes, "Well, I can't nationalise water. What are you going to do next? Nationalise energy? What, like British gas? Come on, Michelle."
Necessarily. The thing about water is that the best way of making sure that the community gets access to good, clean water is when you have local government and locally based institutions who take responsibility for that.
The time at which our water was at its best was in the era of the regional water boards. Clearly, this was the best method to have the delivery being done in the interest of that certain community. There being enough devolution whilst there's also enough centralisation. They just needed to ensure that they could be able to find the capital investment for the necessary upgrades that were relevant, which of course was how they would nationalise, so how they privatised in the first place, by Thatcher, making it a law, essentially, that they couldn't have access to the private capital. And it's true, indeed, Frank Furedi was an ex-head honcho at the Revolutionary Communist Party. It's interesting that we have someone who describes himself as literally a communist with someone literally from the Communist Party. So, I don't know, is GB News the new vector for leftist politics? Answers on a postcard.
Many of you will be nodding along, going, yeah, it's disgraceful that, for example, France would own segments of, say, water in this country. But then do you do it on the reverse? Then do you sit there and say, right, British companies, people, investors, governments, whatever, should be banned from foreign investments as well? I don't know. You tell me. Aaron, what do you make?
Not all foreign investments, though, just in the natural monopolies, which should be state-owned in the first place. Not difficult. It's not a difficult concept to grasp. This what next brigade style, what, nationalising this? What about nationalising sausages? I mean, you might as well literally come out and say, in response, well, you've made a good point, but what happens if we nationalise sausages? I mean, that's the level of argumentation that we get from the fucking airhead that is Michelle Dewberry.
The privatisation of water is, I think, the single biggest organised theft in my lifetime. You've got since the early 1990s more than £55 billion has been given to shareholders as dividends. I think Thames Water isn't too bad. In the last 10 years, it's only 1.2 billion. The CEO is on 1.5 million. And yet these people can't manage their finances properly. And I find it absolutely extraordinary. We have yet another example of you privatise the gains, you give the shareholders the dividends. When the proverbial hits the fan, it's Joe Blogs and it's your viewers and it's the taxpayer who has to pick up the bill. Or in this instance, more specifically, all of us are going to probably have to pay 40% more for water next year. You throw that on top of interest rates, energy, food inflation. It's grim, and I couldn't agree more with what Frank said. It's a fundamental political failure, and the entire establishment should be ashamed of themselves.
So let's explore this kind of notion that water is this kind of commodity that should be available and free for all. I don't dispute that rainwater is this natural kind of asset that belongs to us all and shouldn't be commercialised and all the rest of it. But that's not what we need. What we need is cleaned, sanitised, processed water, and we need sewage systems and all the rest of it, reservoirs and all the kind of infrastructure that sits around that. So when I start to think about, because in principle I agree with what you two are saying, like if I sit here and I go, oh yeah, water is a commodity, you know, why should people make profit from it? Then that's great, but then you lose me. Because then I start to think, well, actually, it is an industry. All the things that I've just mentioned, they are
all paid for by the fucking state, right? These were literally all paid for with taxpayers' money to build the infrastructure in the fucking first place, Michelle. And that's why it was such a gigantic theft, as Aaron rightly points out, that it was sold off on the cheap by the Thatcher administration to private companies. That's the real issue here, is that our money built that infrastructure to serve the public good, and now they have been sold off on the cheap to the mates of the Conservative Party, them to reap the rewards of our investment because of the fact they had access to capital. That's what's theft of all of this kind of stuff. That is why this is failure. The fact that it's a state-owned industry doesn't make it not an industry if you decommodify it at point of sale. But the fact that it was the bills that went into creating infrastructure in the first place were out of public money, that's the key issue here.
Huge. The processing facilities, sanitisation.
They didn't invest in them. Yeah. That's the problem. They've been giving the shareholders the dividends and then they've let the infrastructure crumble. You know, there are some businesses where people have to invest in it, otherwise customers leave. The problem with water is, where do you go?
But then you're talking about bad, I would then paraphrase what you're saying is bad business management. So you're not opposed to the privatisation, you're opposed to what you're saying is where the funds and all the rest of it are being channeled to.
Well, you're not opposed to privatisation, you're just opposed to the fact that these people aren't actually investing in it. Yeah, we're opposed to it because they're never going to invest. Why would they invest? There's no point in them investing when they know that they have a market that is inelastic in demand, so they can essentially charge customers whatever they want because you can't go without water, right? As long as they're cheaper than buying bottled water from the supermarket, they have a monopoly on this inelastic market. They can charge what they want, and they can charge what they want for any reason that they want as well, whether it be to deal with the fact that they keep springing leaks everywhere, throwing water onto our streets, so making up the shortfall in supply in the first place, right? Whether it be to pay off the debts they're continually racking up to be able to be asset stripped to pay out shareholders, like happened in the case of Thames Water, they can make the customers pay for that as well. So this is the issue here, is there is no incentive, there's zero incentive for the investment to happen in the first place. Again, because Michelle must think, oh, well, they just didn't invest because there were bad people in charge. If you put good people in charge, suddenly that dynamic will change. But no, this is just capitalism. This is how shareholder capitalism works. People aren't in there for the overall utility of water delivery. They're in it for money, and they will do what is best for money. And if what's best for money is asset stripping the company, then they'll do it. If overcharging customers at the expense of not investing in infrastructure is what's most profitable, they'll fucking do it. It's not rocket science. Saying like, look, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are so massively out of touch with where the country are with regards to these things, right? I think Aaron Bastani was pointing out on Twitter, in the comments section of this video in question, are full of people saying that they should never have been privatised. There's no competition, it's a monopoly, it's foreign owned, never privatise into the monopolies. Literally, exactly, there's a full of comment section of GB News viewers, people actually go into GB News and comment on the videos, talking about why privatisation for water was silly and they should be nationalised, right? And this is a right-wing audience. Obviously, we've seen from the polling that like a supermajority of Conservative voters want the water industry privatised in the first place anyway. So there's clear consensus even amongst the right wing, which is dangerous, right? If you get a right-wing populist party, I know like a Reform UK, even though there clearly are the most ardent of free market, low-tax capitalists in the country, if they want to take some kind of tactical L on going ahead with things like water privatisation and nationalisation, for example, the nationalise water, mail, rail, and things like that, things that should be the purview of the Labour Party, but mix that in with the kind of reactionary sentiments that the Labour Party usually lose their voters on. They are, after a theoretical period of Keir Starmer failure, they're right, they've got a huge portion of the electorate on lockdown, really and truly. And that's what should scare you. There is scope for a populist right party to do essentially what Rassemblement National are doing in France right now, running on a kind of soft left economic policy plus racism. Someone could do that in the UK, and they would absolutely storm an election. I guarantee it. They would do so well on that platform. So they win over a bunch of kind of class reductionist leftoids with this kind of thing as well. The kind of people who watched Infrared, those kind of people would be absolutely down on board with it because they'd be running on a kind of conservative cultural values, while saying, I tell you what, let's bring these companies into public ownership. Off the back of someone with a big character to bring it forward, like a Johnson or a Farage, the sky's the limit, quite frankly. There is, however, one last clip I'd like to watch, which, speaking of, right-wing conservative rhetoric around the issue of water ownership and water privatisation. Here's a little clip from a friend of the show, Julia Hartley-Brewer, on Talk TV, discussing the issues surrounding what's happening with Thames Water. And she makes a really interesting point here that I don't think anyone's going to really believe.
Told her we're going to get a 40% bill increase in our water bills due to apparently the cost of tackling the sewage crisis and the consequences of climate change. Actually, this is the consequence of mass immigration, a population of 10 million more people, and not a single new reservoir being built in the last 32 years.
Well, it's a huge...
Yes, of course, yeah. This is the real issue here. It's not the fact that we massively cucked ourselves out to the private sector, entrusting them with the basic unit of existence in the form of water, and then just magically pulled the surprise Pikachu face when they didn't bother investing in the future of this actual delivery, rather than just taking the money on a short-term basis and then jetting off to the Caribbean, right? Incredible. No, in fact, it's the migrants' fault. It's the increase in population's fault. She's like, all this increase in people and no new reservoirs. Yes, because they're not incentivized to invest, Julia. The absolute fucking logical contortions these people will force themselves into, not to admit capitalism fucking sucks. Even under a mixed economy capitalism, under social democracy, this is still stupid. This is still dumb. These ideas, these people, they both go, oh, we can't have nationalisation of these things, when literally the whole reason this happened is privatisation. It is the incentive structures that are part of privatisation that led to this happening. But they will find any scapegoat, and of course it's Talk TV, so they'll just find any reason to blame brown people, really and truly. What she's talking about here is there is a general idea for a lot of the public that our failure of public services over the last 13 years is due to the increase in population, more people coming in, using the same services, and the services haven't expanded, right? And then instead of blaming the fact that more people are, instead of blaming the fact that service hasn't expanded, they're blaming the people coming in when the population growth is necessary for an increase in GDP and for a growing economy, an easy way of growing the economy. Instead of saying, what they should be saying is, well, that's absolutely fine. The real solution here is say, well, no, instead of not investing in these public services to expand them as the population expands, right? We should, we should do that. We should invest in them rather than committing to austerity. But of course, they can't go against austerity because they are committed to conservative politics, regardless of the negative externalities that come with it.
Huge lack of investment on the part of the water companies. This is, I'm afraid,
there's a lot of investment in the directors' pay and in shareholders' dividends.
Yeah. So
welcome to capitalism, Julia. Are you fucking new here? Are you new to capitalism? Would you like me to tour you around this wonderful economic system where profit is more important than utility? I feel like you don't quite understand how this works. I wonder if the people in the comments agree with them. Give us an alternative to vote for. I mean, not untrue. This comment here talking about nationalisation. This one person who works in utilities saying the always going to be handed back once profit had been extracted. Yep, 100%. None of the utilities companies should have gone private as they ran out for profit, nothing else. Literally, even in a Talk TV segment where they have given them the easy way out of just blaming the brown people, even the commenters in Talk TV have the right idea. They agree with us, right? They agree with the communists in the form of Frank Furedi and Aaron Bastani, right? Welcome to the revolution, folks. Let's fucking go. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. It does help out the channel and the algorithm. And if you click the bell notification icon, it will let you know when I go live and when I upload videos. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my handle is @NoJusticeMTG, and that is Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. If you want to support my channel in a more financial manner, you can do so by becoming a member for just 99p, by super chatting, or by supporting me on Patreon, with the link is in the description of this video, and hopefully I'll catch you on the next segment.